What's up, PCP Army? Don't forget to unmute the microphone, Robbie. How's everybody doing? Station. I am Rockin Robbie from Pop Culture Philosophers. Thank you for joining us today. Let's go ahead and throw him in. We got Brian here, the Brianiac.
Hey guys. Hey folks. How's it going?
How's it going, Brian? I do want to point out to everybody that Brian's in the same room with the same paint on his wall, but in the daytime, it doesn't look so puke vomit green. It looks really nice.
Yeah. The sun seems to wash out the bright, nearly nauseous yellow. Maybe nauseous yellow. I don't know what we want to call it. But
Sure. Let's call it that, Brian. Let's call it that. But they're not here for us. They're here because today we're about to have a PCP conversation, everybody, with one of the most fantastic new writers in comics of the last several years, in my humble opinion. Brian's a big fan as well. Just celebrating the release of the graphic novel Mountainhead this week. He is also the writer of HOTELL and the writer of Sync and other exciting things. In fact, I just found out that he wrote a Michelangelo story, and I'm like, how have I not read that? I got to check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, give a big station and warm welcome to John Lees.
Hi.
How are you doing, John?
I'm quite flattered by that amazing introduction. I feel like there should be someone better coming in after.
Pish posh. I'm a big fan of your work. I'm a big horror fan, and you have a way of delivering horror comics. I say this all the time on the channel. I think we're in a golden age, like a renaissance of horror comic books. There's so many great ones right now. And I think yours are up there. And then a book like Sync that's just kind of like horror and crime, like and where that comes together. I'm such a fan. And so thank you so much for being here. So John, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Most importantly, how did you get into comic books?
Talking a little bit about myself. As you might be able to tell from the accent, I'm Scottish. I come from Glasgow, Scotland. And I've been writing for about a decade now. My first comic was a superhero comic called The Standard. And from there, I went through and did a horror comic called And Then Emily Was Gone. And I released a series called Oxymoron, Loveliest Nightmare. And then I did your aforementioned Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic with IDW. It was a one-shot with Nick Pitarra. Then following on from that, I released a comic called Sync, which is a kind of Glasgow-based pulp crime horror anthology series. I did that with Comics Tribe. And then most recently, I did HOTELL with AWA Upshot, and the book that's just been released this week, Mountainhead, which is a psychological thriller set up in the Canadian mountains. And in terms of how I get into comics, I've always been a fan of comics, and I've always been a fan of writing. I was one of those like weird kids who, back in primary school or grade school, I guess, in America, primary school in the UK, I would like write little 10-page like short stories with like my own pictures in them, and they actually had a wee library space where they'd put like my books, that I would hang up. And like even back then, I was writing gruesome horror stories of people getting decapitated and that the teacher was probably quite disturbed about. But then like obviously always like even as a kid, I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. But it was actually relatively late on that I'd kind of put two and two together and realised you could write comics. It was actually like just coming out of university, and this would have been about 2008, 2009. I was supposed to do a short film because I studied film at university, and that kind of fell through. So I had this kind of budget set aside that I was going to do if that had nothing to do with it. It was actually a friend of mine who was an artist who asked me to write a comic for them to draw. And I thought, I've never really thought about writing comics before, so I kind of studied a lot about the format of writing comics, and ended up writing something that my artist friend couldn't draw. It was totally different from their style. It actually was The Standard, which I wrote. And I ended up getting paired up with an editor called Stephen Forbes, who ran an online series called The Proving Grounds, where people could submit their scripts, and he would like tear them to shreds in Simon Cowell like fashion and tell people they were terrible, they should become an accountant, they should never write again. I thought it would be quite fun to submit this in and like just learn where I was going wrong and like learn a little bit about the craft of writing from him. And he actually he wrote back and said this was the first script that I've done for The Proving Grounds, where after I finished the excerpt for the column, I wanted to read the whole thing to see how it ended. And then we ended up working together, and he became the editor, my first editor for my first comic. And the rest is history. I've been plugging away in the decade since.
That's awesome. And you're starting to really make a name for yourself in the community here, at least, because I remember, I think the first work of yours I read was Mountainhead with the amazing artwork by Ryan Lee, and then everybody else involved in that as well.
Yeah,
Garbark and
just to
Sean.
cut you off for a second, but the whole creative team is just fantastic. I feel so lucky. Ryan Lee is an amazing artist. I think he's generally one of the most exciting creative voices like of this generation. And Doug Garbark is his perfect colorist, is a perfect partner as a colorist. And Sean Lee, like I worked with him on like Sync and the Turtles comic and my off-brand romantic comedy Deepender. Like we worked together a lot, and like he was the perfect choice for a letter as well. So yeah, the whole creative team is just fantastic.
Oh, it's fantastic. I fell in love with it. And I remember I got an early look. I got to do an advanced review, and I was like, this is awesome. And then I made the connection. I was like, this is from the same writer of Sync, because everybody in the PCP army, they were always telling me week after week, you got to read Sync. You got to read Sync. And
PCP army, I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, right. And I'm a retailer, and I'm like, what's Sync? And so we looked it up, and we had trouble finding some issues here and there, but then we started carrying it. We got to trade paperbacks, and yeah, I fell in love with Sync. Mountainhead had a perfect conclusion. Brian, you just read Mountainhead this week, right?
I did. Yeah.
What do you think about it? Do you have any questions for John about it?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely loved it. And when you're talking about the team, I guess I was part of questions came up with that one. Is that was it kind of a collaborative effort on a lot of the panel layouts? Because that some of those panel layouts were, I don't know, seemed to be intricate to how the story was being moved along. And I don't know, really had some powerful, impactful pages.
Oh, so much of that is Ryan. Like, I wish I could claim credit for some of the ingenious, like intricate layouts and the layers of symbolism and like that's put in. But I'd write something in a script like, focus on Abraham, he looks sad. And then like, I'd come back with like, a magnificent tapestry with all these little fractures and things and like so yeah, Ryan was a genius in that regard. Like he really, and like I definitely wanted to encourage that because I was familiar with Ryan's artwork and I was familiar with like, the kind of stuff he could do. And for me, like one of my main goals making Mountainhead was I wanted like the comics world at large to see like what I had already seen, like that Ryan is such an exciting creative voice. So I was more than happy for him to take my story and interpret it and like bring his own visuals to it and his own auteur like spin to kind of like make it exciting. And I've said it before, but every single page of this book is like something you could put on your wall. It's like a work of art in itself. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I love the style to it. It's definitely stylized, but it's got density and texture to it, right? And the coloring provides a lot of that too. But those layouts, they're really amazing. I love the way that you guys do the title pages, and it's just a nice throwback to old school stuff where they would like the Will Eisner type stuff where he would use. Yeah, like I love that. I think it's really, really cool. Mountainhead was such a wild book because it delves into so many different things. It's a story about this kid who you find out that he doesn't quite belong maybe where he's supposed to. And then you got like elements of like body horror in there and mountain madness and everything. Where did the whole idea for Mountainhead spring up?
Well, it came from a whole bunch of sources. Like probably to best explain that, probably maybe like for anyone who isn't familiar that might be listening, I'll give a wee brief synopsis of what the book's about. So basically, like Mountainhead is the story of Abraham Stubbs, who's this teenage boy who, for as long as he can remember, has been on the run and looking over his shoulder. He's been living off the grid with his mad, sort of crazy conspiracy theory-driven dad, who's convinced that like shadowy government agents are out hunting them down. So they've been kind of burgling houses to survive and kind of like staying off the grid and keeping a low profile. But as Abraham gets older, he's less content with his lot in life. And his dad is starting to increasingly lose his grip on reality and is possibly becoming dangerous. And then when something happens to turn their lives upside down and turn everything that Abraham thought he knew about his life on its head, he gets sent to this place called Brianiac, which is this quiet mountain resort town in Canada. And he's got his dad's lessons ringing in his head. He can't trust anything around him. And maybe, just maybe, those suspicions might turn out to be correct, but in a way he wasn't possibly imagining. So that's the plot. But so in terms of like how the story came about, it came about from a whole bunch of sources. Like I drew a lot from like a couple of real life stories. I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of the story of Stephen Stainer. It was like back in like the maybe late early 80s. It would have been. It's maybe late 70s, early 80s. He was this kid who went missing for 10 years, then reappeared, like much changed. And that was a story I'd heard from a young age. It always stuck with me. And there was another story about a guy called Frederick Bourdan, who was featured in a 2012 documentary called The Imposter, who was this kind of French con artist who convinced this small town that he was like this missing kid who'd been abducted, and went back, like, you know, to live with the family. And then like there's lots of twists in the story, like, you know, so those were a couple of real life stories which were ringing in my head.
Yeah.
Plus like various things like TV shows like Fortitude and or movies like The Thing, like lots of like chilly snow specks, like aesthetic style stories. Those were all kind of big influences, and I kind of put it all into a big pot. And the funny thing was that I actually came up with the story of Abraham first, but I didn't have a kind of plot for it. I had his character, but I didn't know what plot he was going to go in. Then I came up with the idea of Mountainhead and what happens in Mountainhead later on, but I didn't have a character for it, so I ended up kind of putting the two together to kind of make a larger whole in the end.
Oh, it works so well. I'm glad you did. I love it. I thought it had a solid conclusion that took me by surprise. You know, when you read so many comics, and you read and you consume fiction, you wind up almost at times, things can be predictable. And I think a lot of people like the predictability of fiction. They like a story hitting certain beats in certain moments and certain acts, and then having an expected finish. I found every twist and turn in Mountainhead to be completely unexpected. And when a creative team can do that, I think that's just one of the best things out there. So well done.
Thank you very much. I mean, that for me is what the whole thing hinged on. Like, for us, right from the earliest get-go, we knew that issue 3, I won't get into specifics, I don't want to spoil it, but the third issue, like, things turn on their head, and this becomes a very different comic than you think you were initially reading. And the whole thing hinged on whether we were able to kind of, like, bring people along with that. So we were kind of nervously waiting to see the reaction. And, like, there was a lot of shock, which was, you know, and a lot of, like, oh my God, what's going on here? But I think people generally were on board, which was good. And I'm glad people kind of, like, went along with the ride and enjoyed being surprised.
How did you wind up publishing it with IDW? Did you pitch it to them? Did they ask you to pitch something? How did that work?
No, we pitched it to them. It turned out that obviously, like, they knew me a little bit because I'd done the Turtles comic with them, and Bobby Curnow, who was the editor of this, was also the editor of the Turtles comic, and so they knew me a wee bit, and also, like, you know, they knew Sean because Sean does a lot of lettering work for them. And I'd pitched something else to them previously that they were quite interested in, but ultimately passed on. And then, like, you know, so while I was waiting to hear back on that pitch, we'd been pitching like Mountainhead to other places and kind of getting a lot of knockbacks, and we're kind of feeling a bit kind of like, you know, worn down. So me and Ryan were like, okay, we're going to pitch this to IDW, and if IDW says no, we're just going to put it on the shelf and think of something else. So like IDW was like the last chance saloon, and we pitched to them, and we're thinking, like, or they'll probably say no. And actually did say no at first, and this is where, like, Bobby Curnow was like one of, like, the big heroes of the story of Mountainhead, because 9 editors out of 10 would have, like, looked at our pitch pages, not liked them, and said, no thanks, we're going to pass in this. But Bobby said, these pitch pages aren't particularly strong. I don't think it really sells the whole concept of the story, but I'm interested in it. So if you want to go back and come up with new pitch pages that kind of show this, this, and this, and resubmit it, we'll reconsider it. So we did that, and we ended up kind of putting together a new pitch and sent it in. IDW liked that one, and then, like, you know, they picked us up, and the rest was history from there.
That's awesome. I think it's really important to push the trade paperback because of the whole COVID-19 situation, the Diamond shutdown. Yeah, it's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful design. Did Sean design the workbook too?
Yeah, it's mentioned, like, Sean Lee, like, is not only a great letterer, but he's an absolute genius tier designer. He put together, like, a really impressive physical artifact. Even, like, the orange spine is really aesthetically pleasing. And, like, this book just came out in comic shops this Wednesday, 13th of January. And so, yeah, it's available in comic shops worldwide now. I'm sure it's available online to order too. But yeah, like, you know, for me, like, obviously the single issues were hit with various issues throughout, like, the year. Like, you know, like, issue 4 like came out or was supposed to come out like the week like, you know, every comic shop in the world was shut down through COVID, you know, then we got to push back to the date when like all distribution shut down, you know, and then like, you know, so like we were hit with a bunch of like things that really stalled momentum, like, and really kind of left us kind of feeling demoralized. And I'm not sure if you read the afterword, like, you know, in the end of like the last issue, but it was weird where like almost the worst we felt the whole process of making this was when we had like 3 or 4 issues done. Actually the whole series pretty much done, but due to factors outside of our control and outside of IDW's control, we just couldn't get it released, and we felt powerless. And we were thinking, like, it's worse. It's almost worse than not having a book out and having just enough of a book out for folk to be like have expectations when saying, "Hey, what's up with Mountainhead?" And like, so that was really kind of stressful. And we were really worried we would have lost their audience. So it meant so much that like when that last issue finally came out, readers were like had waited for us, and they're like, you know, oh, that it was worth the wait. And like, so it meant a lot to have like, you know, reader loyalty and reader patience in that regard. I think a lot of folk maybe understood that, like, you know, it's been a difficult year for all of us, so maybe a bit more understanding.
Yeah, it was a difficult year for all of us. We all had things swept out from under us and all that kind of stuff. Brian, anything else you want to ask him about Mountainhead, brother?
Well, yeah, and it's actually kind of related to some of the, you know, some of your other work, like, you know, HOTELL and even Sync too. Is one thing that's really impressed me about your work is you seem to pack. I mean, you pack a lot of you know, kind of storylines, and you know, comics aren't very long, you know, technically, you know, to read and get through everything like that. And is that like a something you're always trying to you know, put into your work? Because I mean, you weave in all these plots that sometimes don't really seem like they're gonna, you know, have anything to do with each other, but then they do. You know, I don't know. Is that?
Well, I will say that it makes my books incredibly hard to pitch. Like, you should have seen me trying to pitch like a Mountainhead in the show floor to editors. It sounded like, you know, a bad stand-up comic, like trying to explain a joke and going, actually, this bit here happens here, but remember this because it comes back later on. You know, so sometimes I'm a little worst enemy in terms of like coming up with these kind of complex, convoluted stories. But for me, like, that's part of like the fun of like the medium, especially when you're dealing with serialized, you know, stories. The idea of like setting things up and going, oh, where's this going? I don't know what this means. I'm a bit confused. You know, what is that? How does this figure in here? And then, like, you know, a couple of issues later, going, oh, that's how it all clicks into place. Like, you know, obviously, like, you know, I'm a fan of like, obviously my style is very different, you know, but I'm a fan of like Grant Morrison, who is a big one for doing stuff like that, of like, you know, seeding things in, and like, you know, then just when you forgot about them, it comes back into play later on. That for me is like part of the fun of like doing comics. In terms of like packing material in, like, I do, you know, like sometimes feel painfully self-aware that like I'm frequently packing like 30 pages of story into a 20-page bag, but like, you know, but sometimes I feel like I want to kind of like, I think it's best to have too much story than not enough. So I like to kind of make my comics feel dense and meaty and like a worthwhile read.
Yeah, and yeah, when I say packing it in, you know, I can see that having a negative connotation, but it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't, like, nothing feels rushed. You know, there's so much there, but nothing feels rushed getting towards the end. I don't know. It's like, it's really cool.
That's good to know. It doesn't come across. I know sometimes when I'm writing it, I think, oh my God, I'm doing too much here. I know. So it's good to know that doesn't come across in the page.
Well, one of the things I always hear as a criticism on modern comics is that they're too decompressed, right? And I think your books are dense. There's a lot of stuff in there, and it's not too dense. It's not overly dense where you're like, it's challenging to try to muddy through it. They got a great flow. And of course, you've worked with great artists that have a lot to do with that as well. So let's not forget them, because you've worked with some amazing freaking artists. Alex Cormack and Mountainhead, and I don't know how to pronounce Dalibor's. Talich.
Yeah, I became his PR agent. Where like my job now is like, my job 1A is like comic writer. Job 1B is just like going around to as many like video like formats as I can and just say, this is how you pronounce Dalibor's.
You're doing the Lord's work, so thank you so much, because that's a great one. Mountainhead is so fantastic. What else you got, Brian?
Well, I was gonna ask one thing about the HOTELL one is the the name of the hotel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Piero Courts. But I was wondering, like, what was the inspiration for using that? Because I mean, when I was first reading it, I saw the painting, and I didn't connect the names. I went back and looked at the names because that's something I usually do when I read stuff, is try to figure out if the names, are chosen, symbolically and things like that. I was just wondering, what was the inspiration for using the Piero character?
That goes way back to when we first started working on Hotel. Like back before I pitched Hotel, like it started with a conversation with Axel Alonso. I met him at in 2018 in New York. We met like for lunch, and he said he was a big fan of Sync, and like he was at the time the AWA hadn't been announced, but he was saying like, we're working on a new publisher line, we're looking to get some, new talent on board, like with an opening line of books, like, would you be interested in like, doing something for us? And like, so he said, so there's one of my first experiences of like pitching on spec, but a publisher had approached me and said like, come up with ideas for us. So just based on those conversations, what he was interested in seeing, like, he was like, at one point during the conversation, he mentioned like, like I love the clowns in Sync. Like, do you have any more ideas with clowns in them? And like, after doing like Sync, like the last thing in the world I wanted to do was a kind of story about a clown in it. Like, I'm thinking, I don't want to become the clown guy. I don't want to become like my author photo is me with the clown makeup going like, the clown boy, but like, so like I thought, okay, if I'm going to do another story about a clown, how can I do one that's as diametrically opposed and different to the clown in or the clowns in Sync as I could? So like, for those who aren't familiar with Sync, like the main kind of like monsters that haunt the periphery of like the world of Sync Hill, this kind of grubby district of Glasgow, are the blue van clowns. It's these kind of like deranged gang of clowns who drive around in a blue transit van and kidnap people and like cut up their faces and give them Glasgow smiles and then like gas them and turn them insane and turn them into other clowns. So they're really kind of, like rugged, like really getting ragged and, nasty and gnarly. So I thought the polar opposite of that would be to do like something from the Commedia dell'arte, which is like, the old like, Italian like theatre. And they have these archetypes and these figures. And one of them is like Piero, the sad clown, like, with like the white face paint, like, the white ruffled collar. I thought it might be quite fun to do like something based on that. So when I was coming up with the idea of Hotel, I came up, there he is. Yep. I came up with one of the first ideas when I was, realizing like Piero Courts, I had the idea of Hotel, which was this kind of, the idea was it was a kind of horror anthology about an old roadside motel off Route 66, which was haunted, and where like, various like supernatural goings on were happening. So I had the idea of making the framing device for this hotel be, it's called Piero Courts, and it has this massive framed painting of Piero the clown in the lobby. And if you look in that first page of the first issue, every single time like you go away from the painting and come back to it, the clown's moved slightly. Like, so, yeah. And that was one of the first ideas I had for the series, like, and then from there I kind of built out from there.
I never noticed anything about that clown. I noticed it, but I'll tell you this without trying to spoil anything. When it starts happening in in issue 4, like I like lost my mind. I was like, what the hell is going on here? This is awesome. It's so crazy. And I love how you, it seems like anthologies, which used to be so prevalent in comic books and throughout most of comic books history, anthologies were like it, people loved it. Even if you bought Superman Action Comics, there'd be other stories in there. I love how you embrace the anthology. And you do it so well, and the way you tie it all together is really, really great. I want to get into some comments from the chat and some questions here. Travis says, ooh, a comic based in Canada. I'm in. There you go. You got to have representation. How long ago was Mountainhead actually constructed?
Well, actually, cheap plug alert. If you subscribe to my newsletter at deepender.johnleescomics.com, that's deep-ender.johnleescomics.com, tomorrow's edition is all about the construction of Mountainhead, taking me through the whole process of how it was made from initial concept to final release. And as I explained, the book has had a lot of beginnings. Like, it was first announced in 2019. We first started actively working on it and putting together artwork and pitching it late 2016. But this has been germinating in my head, like, you know, when I've been building stuff, you know. Actually, I trace it way back to like as far back as like the 1990s when I first saw like the TV movie about the Steven Steiner story that I was talking about earlier on.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like every comic has a whole lot of beginnings and a whole lot of like levels of construction that go towards making it. So it's quite an interesting process.
Absolutely. Awesome. Travis has a question for Mr. John Lees. Is there any chance we might see more from Hotel?
There is a chance we might see more from Hotel. That would ultimately depend on you guys. Obviously, like the response has been great. The kind of like buzz has been great, like, you know, but ultimately it's going to depend on, like, you know, like if we look at sales and we see, like, you know, there's a sufficient interest in seeing more, then we'll absolutely, I know, like me and Dalibor like are well up for doing more. And so, yes, like, you know, I'd say it looks promising because, like, you know, sales have been strong so far. So, like, watch this space and hopefully we'll be able to have something concrete in the future. We'll see.
Oh, I hope so. There's got to be more Hotel. I want to see so much more. There's so much potential there as far as the history and the future of that place. I think it's amazing. Nick had a question. You've already talked a little bit about the inspiration of Hotel, but what was the process like? Were you able to pitch that with the artist in mind? Did you get teamed up with them? Did they boy band you? What did they do?
Well, yeah, the boy band did this. This is my first, because normally whenever I pitch something, like I assemble a creative team, and, like, you know, it's people that I know, and, like, you know, we kind of work on pitching it all together as a package. This time, like, as I say, I was pitching on spec, so, like, it was just me as a writer pitching the idea, and then they paired me up with a team. So they paired me up with, like, you know, Dalibor and Art, Lee Lowridge on colors, and, like, Sal Cipriano on letters. These are all, like, all-star creators with, like, big 2 credits. Like, I was the unknown commodity in, like, this team, like, you know, so I felt a bit kind of daunted, like, you know, there's all these professionals and there's this scrub here, like, what's going on? But like, they were all super professional. It ended up being a really harmonious working relationship. Even though it was kind of like an arranged marriage, like, me and Dalibor, like, did meet up at New York Comic Con, like, the year before last, when we could meet in person. And, like, we clicked right away. The first time we met each other was when we sat down next to each other to do a signing. And we switched our name tags around, you know, and like, immediately from that point, like, you know, we got on, we were kind of like finishing each other's sentences and, like, you know, telling jokes, and, or, like, you know, Dalibor would say something and I'd add something on, like, you know, so we clicked right away. So, like, you know, it was great. So in that sense, like, in terms of, like, how the process of, like, storyboarding Hotel or putting it together, for me, especially with that first issue, it maybe trailed off a little bit with the following issues, but in that first issue, I set myself a goal of putting, like, one scary thing in each page, or one thing that's not quite right. So in every page of that script to Dalibor, there was something like, sometimes it was overtly scary, like, you know, a monster baby shows up in this page, you know, but other times it's like little things like the painting that keeps on moving, or like something in the background that doesn't quite add up right. Or in one of the pages, like, I just put, we never actually went back to explain this, but one of the pages I put, they drive by, you know, like, you know, she drives by, like, a bush, and, like, if you look closely, you can see a pair of eyes and a pair of fingers peering at the bottom of the bush, you know.
Yeah, right.
Like, you know,
I remember that.
And, like, little things like that, kind of, I wanted to kind of, like, put people on edge where they were reading and they were uncomfortable. Maybe they weren't exactly sure why they were uncomfortable. Like, I wanted to have lots of things like that in the book, and Dalibor was a great fit. And the great thing about Dalibor's art is that he's not someone who's naturally kind of, like, ghoulish or, you know, horror artist. He's quite grounded and quite realistic. And, you know, so that on one hand, that's really good for establishing the real world locations, but it also means that when things get really kind of, like, crazy and scary, because it has that kind of grounded effect and it all feels quite, like, you know, every day, when you inject the horrific into that, it almost feels more jarring than scary.
Heck yeah. I do want to point out to everybody that in the description below, if you haven't checked out any of these books, we have links down below to check out Sync, Mountainhead, and Hotel. Fantastic stuff. And y'all, just wait and see on Rockin Robbie Live on Sunday night. Hopefully, I'm going to be talking about that Michelangelo book, because when I was watching you on Lost in Comics, station for Lost in Comics, you had mentioned that Michelangelo book. I'm like, that's my favorite turtle. I got to read this book. And you said you did that with Nick Batara?
I did do it with Nick Batara.
Oh, my goodness.
Which was a lot of fun, because obviously, like, I was a massive fan of the Manhattan projects.
Yeah.
And like so, and like I'd kind of got to know Nick through like I'd featured him in like one of my top 10 comics lists at one point, and we kind of kept in touch after that. But we really got to know each other when he became a massive champion of my comic and then Emily Was Gone. He really did a lot to push that and get it in front of people. And it was actually Nick who was kind of instrumental in me working together, like with him on that book. Because I think I did originally ask Nick if he wanted to write and draw his own issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe, and he's like, I'll do it, but I'd like John Lees to write it for me. I'm sure like the IDW were like, who the hell is John Lees? But that was how I got on board for that. Like, and he said, pitch us some ideas. So we pitched the idea of reviving the character of Worm, who was a character who appeared as an action figure and who appeared in like the old Archie comics, but never actually appeared in the cartoon because he was considered too frightening. So me and Nick came up with our own version of that character and like pitched it for a story, and they loved the idea and we were able to do it, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
What I love now is it's so cool to be able to contribute to mythology, where even though like my involvement in Turtles has long since been wrapped up, occasionally I'll check out like a Turtles message board and like some new shadowy villain will be appearing and everyone's going, oh, I wonder if it's Worm coming back. Like, I love the idea. I've injected something into like the larger mythos. It just gets to exist beyond me now.
Oh, that's got to be super, super cool. I think that's a great idea. Second Street Marbles in the house says, freaking love Mountainhead. Also need more Hotel. Well, like John said, it's up to us. We got to let AWA, Alex, or Axel, we got to let them know in a non-spammy way that we want more Hotel, like right now. Like we love here in the PCP Army. We're loving what AWA is doing. I think Brian likes some AWA stuff, but there was nothing like Hotel for me. And I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass, John. Like I'm being really real. Think they were amazing. Lots of compliments from the PCP Army out here. Loved your recent horror books, man. Mountainhead and Hotel were amazing. Definitely some of the best of last year.
Thank you very much. And like I say, it's really cool. What I really appreciate is that the Hotel Mountainhead seemed to have picked up a whole lot of new readers, and it's really gratifying when those new readers are then going back and checking out my old stuff. Like it's really cool to see like folk picking up Sync, which has been around for a couple of years now, and like after I read Hotel, I went and checked out Sync and I enjoyed that as well. And I should add that more Sync's coming. I'm going to be working on some more coming out this year, so watch this space and that fun.
Nice, because that was definitely a question we were going to get, because everybody wants to know if there's more Hotel and if there's more Sync. And there's got to be. Sync is so raw, so brutal. One of the members of the Excitable PCP crew, Mike the Voice Matthews, wanted me to ask you, is anything about the way you're portraying the community in Sync related to your upbringing? Did you grow up in a rough area? Did you have a when I
was a child, I was kidnapped by a blue transit van full of glass.
Like, wow, this is deep.
I was going to say, you're not.
To be honest,
If
if I was just a character who's most like me in Sync, it would probably be like the kid in issue 1 who's like, I live in Glasgow, I'm really tough, but actually, like, he lives in the suburbs.
Yeah, right.
That's probably me. But like, I had like a largely like happy childhood removed from like some of the crazier stuff going on in Glasgow. Yeah, like for me, like there are certain elements like that definitely kind of like draw from experience. Like issue 4, the young team. When I was a kid, me and my older cousin and a couple of his friends, like during the summer holidays one year, all went hunting for like the blue van clowns, because the blue van clowns is a real urban legend like in my area. So like we all got makeshift weapons and we started just walking around like the local area like hunting for these clowns. We never found them. I don't know what would have happened if we had found them. We probably wouldn't have been able to do much. But so that kind of like ended up being an initial impetus for like the young team story in issue 4. Yeah, I get that. What I love about Sync is that Sync has became like this home for all kinds of different ideas and characters, where sometimes you'll have an idea of a character, you don't know if you can make a series out of it, but you can just fit it into the umbrella of Sync, and you can. It's like we do all kinds of different stories. I've done horror stories, I've done pulp crime stories, I've done action stories, the romantic comedy story. I managed to do everything under the wing of Sync. So and we're going to be continuing more of that as we go ahead. We're going to try and do some more ambitious things, and yeah, like volume 3 is pretty much all written. And we've got, as it's been kind of announced, it's not been like announced a lot, but it's been put out there enough that I can say it. The next thing coming out in the sort of Sync universe is a comic called Dig, which is going to be an original graphic novel which tells the story of Mr. Dig and goes into his backstory a little bit. That's going to be the next thing coming out, which we'll hopefully have, you know, more of in the summer. Then immediately after that coming out, we're going to launch right into Volume 3, and hopefully have that coming out like late 2021, early 2022.
Is Alex the artist on the graphic novel?
Alex is a machine. Alex is drawing Sea of Sorrows.
Doing a great job there.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's going to be drawing like Dig and Sync Volume 3. He's doing a whole bunch of comics for Bliss and Tap, and he's doing another currently unannounced comic, you know, with me, all at the same time, you know, while also being like a stay-at-home dad. So like the guy's a machine.
That's awesome. That's super cool. Brian, you just recently, I think, read Sync for the first time. What did you think about it, and what do you think? What do you got to ask Mr. Lees?
Okay, yeah, I did read the first volume, and you brought up issue 4, which definitely stood out to me for a couple reasons. Did want to, you said it was, you know, kind of, you know, based on your, you know, growing up, but the title struck me. This may be coming out of left field, but does it have anything to do with possibly one of the best albums ever recorded, Mogwai Young Team, that came out 20 years ago?
Sadly not. Young Team is a Glasgow term. A lot of times, like a lot of like local gangs, especially like, you know, kids gangs around Glasgow will call themselves like something Young Team, like, you know, the Postle Park Young Team, you know, the Gorbals Young Team, you know, and like so that's where it kind of came from. Although funny bit of trivia, like Grant Morrison's like Super Young Team is also a similar play on like the Young Team, like, you know, archetype of Glasgow.
Oh. Okay. Okay. Oh, wow. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. I really, I mean, I liked all the issues in there that I read. I really liked 3 and 4. But I do have to say, like, after I read 4, I was, you know, pretty dark stuff and everything. So actually, after I read issue 4, I went and opened up some Mobius comics just to look at some different images to you know, kind of level myself back out. But yeah, I don't know. I'm going to go pick up here Volume 2 here pretty soon, and that's really exciting about the graphic novel coming out.
Yeah, no, like I say, I hope you enjoy Volume 2. Like my personal favorite issue of the series is issue 10, which is the last one in Volume 2. So I hope you enjoy that one.
Okay, yeah, that's really exciting about that Dig coming out, because I really he was prominent in that issue 4 there.
Yeah, and he comes back in Volume 2 as well. Like, you know, he's our main recurring character, and folk have really responded to Mr. Dig. Like one of some of the craziest things I've seen is like people coming up to me at conventions and showing me like their Mr. Dig sleeve tattoos and stuff, and it's like, you know,
oh wow,
that's a lot of pressure. It's like that says like, you know, you can't let the quality of like the writing slip, you know, because folk are really disappointed that they've made this commitment in their flesh, you know, of Mr. Dig.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, yeah. I did go back and read, and then Emily was gone, because I did have a friend of mine recommend it to me about 5 years ago. You know, when it came out, and I read the first issue and I liked it, but at that time I wasn't reading I wasn't reading a lot of digital stuff, and I don't know, just, you know, I didn't get a chance to go back to it until recently, and man, but then I also realized that I had seen Ian McGlory's work before, which was really phenomenal in that book. But he recently did something called The Edge Off. I don't know if you.
Yeah, no, he did The Edge Off with a friend of mine, Fraser Campbell, who's an incredibly talented writer. Yeah, like, you know, they worked together a lot. They also did a book called House of Sweets, which it's one of those scripts, one of those rare examples you need a script and it makes you angry, like, you know, that I've been trying to, like, you know, chase like the dream of doing like proper scary horror for a decade, and Fraser on his first attempt like does something that's scarier than I've ever written, you know. So you know, I definitely recommend that. But yeah, Ian Laurie, but then Emily was gone, like that, the main impetus of that book for me was essentially I was doing like Ian Laurie fanfic. Like I was a huge fan of Ian Laurie, like from like Horror Mountain and like, you know, Mothwick and all the things that he'd done like in Poughkeepsie, which is like he's a legend of like the Scottish indie comic scene. And I have loved the idea of like writing a comic which was tailored like specifically to what the kind of stuff that I knew he could draw so well. Lots of sweaty faces and bulging eyes and hysteria and like monstrous creations and ugly people, and like so like for me, like basically like the whole process of that was fascinating because it was a real proper co-creation. We were basically like me saying to Ian, what do you like? What do you want to draw? And like we both like Twin Peaks. We both like, John Carpenter in The Mouth of Madness. We both like League of Gentlemen, not League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I'm talking about the British TV show League of Gentlemen. We love Hammer horror, so we threw it all into a big mix, and the process was, and then Emily was gone.
Heck yeah, that sounds cool. Scotland has a lot of talented creators throughout history. You got Eddie Campbell, you got, of course, Mark Millar, you got Robbie Morrison, you got Alan Grant. One of my favorite writer of all time is Grant Morrison.
Frank Quitely, yeah.
And Frank Quitely. I love Grant's work so much. And so I'm glad you've mentioned them already, because I wanted to know, how much did Grant's work influence you, and especially being from Scotland?
Well, it's difficult because I would say I'm the first to admit that Grant Morrison is probably my all-time favorite comics writer, not just because he's from Glasgow, not Glasgow. Does he come from Glasgow? Possibly. I know he doesn't live in Glasgow. He lives in Port Glasgow now, but I
think he's mentioned being from there.
Yeah. I think he originally came from but at the very least he's Scottish. So that's not the only reason why he's someone that I admire. Although that's part of it, the fact that someone that came from where I come from has done all this stuff in the comics industry. But I think he's just such a great storyteller, such a unique voice. And even though my style isn't really anything like his, I really admire his work, and I really admire his creativity and how he can weave a story over a long term and build characters and build mystery. His Batman run for me is one of the seminal works of comics of all time. I think it's immensely satisfying. For me, I think it's the definitive Batman story ever. And then they also did the definitive Superman story ever with All-Star Superman.
You're right.
And then not to mention his create own stuff like We Three, The Invisibles, Klaus. For me, I think he's just such an incredibly gifted creator. And yeah, so it definitely I'd say was an inspiration in terms of just even if I wasn't doing much in his style, just inspiration of how exciting comics can be, and how you can tell stories that people care about in comics. I would love to have somebody be as impacted by my comics as Grant Morrison's comics impacted me.
Well, I'll tell you this, John.
In a totally different way.
I'll tell you this, John. That actually has happened, because Mike, who asked me that question, did your background relate to anything you've written? Mike told me today that he wanted to let you know, how wild does it feel to have somebody who in small town Alabama in the U.S. literally have their life affected by your work? And Mike said that happened in particular with Sync.
Oh, that really means a lot. That's incredible. I mean, obviously, I know a lot of writers that are or creators a lot of very pretentious and oh yes, my work is the work, and it doesn't even know what anyone else thinks is relevant. I'm just trying to express my creativity, but I think that's going to be it. I think we all want to be loved, really. So I know will this make them love me is the ultimate impetus of creation. But for me, that means a lot. I like to say it's a bit of a buzzword, but I like to say every comic I make, I want to potentially be somebody's favorite, but to hear that's the best thing you can hear, but it's that when your comics have had a tangible impact with somebody, and have resonated with people, and you've written something that means something to somebody else. That's the best feeling in the world. That's better than any contract or gig. The fact that you can do something that really connects with people that's just magic, I think, especially when it's someone so far out of I'm here in Glasgow and it's across the Atlantic. That for me blows my mind.
Yeah, he definitely wanted me to mention that to you, and he was being very sincere. And Mike is a big fan of your work, and he's probably watching right now, but he's probably freaking out right now because I keep talking about him.
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. That really means a lot. And don't be embarrassed. you know, like especially when we're working at the grindstone and we're feeling stressed and anxious and, you know, trying, you know, like worrying like, you know, if this project's going to have any impact, or like, you know, worrying how we're going to get the next script done, yada yada. Hearing stuff like that, like, you know, is like refilling your energy bar, like, you know. So thanks a lot. It really means a lot.
It does mean, and that's the thing, is that comics can have that impact. They can even literally change lives. Like we were talking about Grant's work, and The Invisibles literally changed my life. Like I've read that book so many times. It is my Bible. It is my scripture. It's my holy scripture that I read like annually, and learn more about the world, myself, and just this majestic universe we live in. And I love how you touched on this, but the Grant is someone who can bring that positivity into comics. He's excited. Grant's excited about comic books, you know, and I feel that. And so many people, whether they're fans, whether they're retailers, or whether they're creators, sometimes people can seem like they hate this industry, you know, and it's nice to hear from you in particular, a passion for comic books and the medium. What is it about comic books that you think separates it from TV, film, novels? What makes comics so special?
I don't know. It's quite a difficult question. Like, obviously, every medium has its own strengths. Like, I think one of the strengths of comics, strangely enough, is its limitations. I like the challenge of like the structure that comics gives you. Like, you know, you only have like X number of pages to tell a story. You only have like, you know, the panels, like, you know, the still images. It's this whole new language, and I think because it's a kind of new to a certain degree, but a new art form, there's still scope to like do new things in it that haven't been done before, or do them in a way not quite like anyone else has done them. It feels like you're a bit of an explorer, like, you know, like, you know, going through new ground. And for me, like, I just think that it's a medium that has so much creativity because of that aspect of it being new and being kind of like a bit off the beaten path. You get some of the most exciting creative voices. Like for me, like to talk about like however many like people used to talk before cinema shut down. People used to talk about like however many new movies were hitting cinemas every week. Like, oh, there's like 6 big new movies in the cinema this week. Like, you know, but like every week, every Wednesday, you can walk to your local comic shop and see like a shelf full of incredible ideas, and people have, you know, creating whole new worlds across a breadth of genres. I'm not like a superhero like snob. Like, you know, I love superheroes as well. Like, you know, so like you have these great superhero stories. You have like people like putting their contribution to these large, sprawling like mythos that have lasted for decades and will continue to last for decades. You know, that's exciting. Then, you know, beyond that, you also have like new stories. You have people like coming up with like new horror comics, new like crime comics, new comedy comics, romance comics, action comics, sci-fi. Like it's just pure like creativity and like ideas, and it's nothing like that's been watered down by what budget do we have, or like, you know, what like stars will agree to do this. Like, you know, it's just pure like, you know, idea like in page form. And for me, like there's nothing more exciting than just getting like, and I will say this, going a little bit of a tangent, you know, but for me, like during this pandemic, like when we're stuck in the house, like one of the big endorphin hits that kept me going was like getting like, you know, the arrival of mail at my door, and it being like a new comic, the physical artifact of a comic book, like, you know, with like, you know, that you can look at the art inside and feel like that, you know, just even like, you know, this is a random book, like, you know, like the, you know, the physical like presence of something, like, you know, and the texture, like, you know, for me that whole thing is just like a part of it as well. Like, you know, it's art, it's story, it's visual, you know, it's everything like, you know, that you might want in a narrative, you know. And for me, I think it's just such an exciting medium.
Oh yeah,
and I hope that random discussion like answered your question.
Oh no, I love it. I mean, this is conversation, and I've always said this so much, and this is why I love comics, especially indie comics, is that I think you get more new ideas through comics than you definitely do movies. Most movies nowadays, I mean, and there's still plenty of movies that are made. Everybody, we understand this. Plenty of movies that are made, original ideas, original you know, creators, but like, so many of this stuff is just adaptations or sequels, or they're trying to make their big tentpole franchise. Warner Brothers trying to figure out what to do since they've lost Harry Potter. What are we doing? We got to have like a 10-movie franchise. We got to sell like toys and action figures and all. The pure creativity that comes out of comics, especially indie comics these days. Oh my goodness. It's out there, which leads me to my next question. What comics are you just loving right now?
See, I always hate this question because like I have like a million like comics in my head and a bunch of comics that I'm reading, and the second somebody says what comics you're reading, I'm like, oh, Batman, I can't think of anything. But
Yeah.
I am reading Batman, But let's see. We've got the Department of Truth, which is great and scary and so timely. Like you don't think they even knew how timely it would be when they wrote it. Martin Simmons is a guy I've known for years in the UK comic scene. He's a lovely guy, and it's just really nice to see someone who's so nice, get so much success, well-deserved success with his talent. And like he's a great partner for James Tynion in that story. Like that's really great and vital. I'm not just mentioning him because like I work with him and he's my art brother, but like Sea of Sorrows is excellent. Like I've read the scripts for that series beyond like the issues that have been released, and it just gets better and better. Nice. And the ending is just pure terror. For me, like that's a perfect partner for The Lighthouse that came out, the movie. If you want some ambience, watch, have the lighthouse playing in your telly, and be reading Sea of Sorrows. Homesick Pilots, I've only read issue 1 of that, but like that was fantastic. I think that's going to be a really exciting, really cool idea, which I think is going to be lots of scope to like haunted house mechas. Like how cool is that?
I know, right?
Blue and Green, I think Ram V, and Anand Arke and Aditya Bidikar, is just a powerhouse team.
Look what I just happen to have right next to me.
Well done. You should always have that close to you. But actually, a second to think I've got mine here.
Yeah, I was just going to say I recommended The Lighthouse to Robbie the other day because I finally saw that a week or two ago.
Yeah, but it's a great movie. It's my favorite last year. But
yeah, it did remind me of
Brian. Weird Stretch with us. Where's your Blue and Green? Where's it at?
Yeah,
I can find it. Give me a minute.
Don't worry about it.
Silently and read the book for the rest of the podcast, for me, like when I first heard of that comic, I thought this is like the event comic of 2020. Forget like any superhero thing or any crisis or whatever. Like, this is an event comic for me, and it lived up to expectations. It's scary and it picks at the scabs of like anxieties that like you didn't even know you had. I just think it's like really good, really scary. And anytime that team's announcing anything, like I'll pick up their book without even knowing the plot. Like you could tell me, like it's that team doing like a comic adaptation of the phone book, and I'd probably be interested. But yeah, I'm trying to think what else. And my favorite book of last year was probably Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. I think that was
yeah,
wonderful book.
Funny, smart, big-hearted, everything you'd want in a comic.
Go
ahead, but I was going to say that I met Matt Fraction at Heroes Con last year when cons were a thing, and like that book was about to launch, and he told me it was like the most complex book structurally that he's ever come up with, and I was like, how in the hell is Jimmy Olsen a complex
it's
structure? And it is. It's so well done.
Of a comic. And then probably the big thing I've read this past year is like an older thing that I went back and rediscovered. You probably, if you follow me on Twitter, I've probably gone about this nonstop. But over the past year, I became proper obsessed with the manga of Naoki Urasawa. It was a bunch of friends of mine in our WhatsApp group like peer pressured me into picking up 20th Century Boys on the first volume. And I was like, okay, I'll pick up the first volume. And I read it, and literally it might be like my all-time favorite comic now. It is utterly jaw-droppingly good. I don't like the basic premise of the plot is it's like a group of school kids in the 1960s come up with this plan like to save the world, where like they come up with this wee story, this kind of wee comic they make up about like this evil like threat to the world that they're able to stop. And then years later, like in the late 90s, when they're all adults, like the stuff that they wrote about when they were a kid starts happening in the real world, and like they have to, they're the ones they realize they're the ones that have to stop it, even though they're all like supermarket employees and like accountants and stuff now. And it's such an epic series full of mysteries and stuff. And based off of reading that, I picked up all of Naoki Urasawa's other stuff like Monster and Pluto, which like Monster, Pluto, and 20th Century Boys like the holy trinity for me. I think they're 3 of the best comics ever made, and I think a lot of Western comics readers haven't heard of them. If you're one of these people who thinks, well, I've read all the canon classics, I've read your Watchmen, your Dark Knight Returns, your Mouse, whatever, and you're thinking I've read all of the all-time classic comics, do yourself a favor, go on like Amazon or contact your local comic shop or whatever and order volume 1 of 20th Century Boys and or Monster and prepare to have your mind blown.
I have heard a lot of good things about Monster. I have never even heard of 20th Century Boys. I've somehow missed that on your Twitter page.
I've been meaning to pick that up for a long time.
Well, I'm getting it now. I'll tell you what. I know the guy who orders our graphic novels at our shop, and it's me. So we're gonna be getting that one. I read a lot of like the old school stuff. I haven't been reading a lot of anything new. Like the last new manga I read was like Blade of the Immortal and Akira. That was a long time ago.
I actually picked up the movie of Blade of the Immortal. I've not watched it yet, but yeah.
Yeah, Blade of the Immortal is a great one. So and Lone Wolf and Cub those
seriously go get 20th Century Boys, and then when we've all finished it, you can invite me back on and we can all just talk about it.
Yeah, a whole let's do it. I'm writing it down right now, John. You're locked in. You're locked in.
You call it research, right? When we do that, it's research, right?
Yeah, you can write it off your taxes, Brian, but don't. We had a good question from Cerebros. Cerebros, by the way, a podcast, mostly X-Men centric, but he talks about a lot of just comic books in general. I was just on the newest episode. It is amazing. He's a super cool cat, and I had a great time chatting with him about comic books. He says, is John interested in writing superhero comics? And if so, which heroes interest you?
Well, for me, like, I would say that if I managed to make my whole career just like telling my own stories the way I wanted to tell them, I would be content. But having said that, I think like a lot of people like get into comics like from reading like Marvel, DC superhero stuff. So yeah, there's a part of me that would think it would be awesome like to do something like that. I don't know if I'm cut out for doing like the big like ongoing runs purely because like I've been on Twitter long enough to know that once you get one of those flagship books, like everyone on the internet hates you. So I'm not sure, you know, I don't know if I can cope with that. But I would love to maybe do a wee kind of like prestige format miniseries somewhere off the beaten track or whatever, you know. But yeah, I would love that chance to like do like a Batman story or a Spider-Man story, like, you know, I think like obviously like I grew up with those characters, you know, like I'm sure I've had story ideas, like I acted out with my action figures when I was a kid, you know, like, like, you know. So yeah, obviously like, that'd be a lot of fun to do something on those terms, like, you know, or like for someone a bit less, you know, A-list, you know, I love Swamp Thing. That would be cool to do. Well, I used to say that I would love to do a Swamp Thing story, but then like Ram V just got like hired to write Swamp Things. I'm like, well, that's me. I'm never going to do a Swamp Thing story ever.
Yeah, right. Well, between Alan Moore and Ram V, it's over. It's over now. Nobody's going to be able to top that. The Swamp Thing book is great. Have you read his first issue yet?
No, I've put it on my order, but like my local comic shop is closed with lockdown, so like they're only doing mailing list stuff and only comes out every couple of weeks. So it's in my next order. It's due to come, but I've not got it yet.
Nice. I liked it. I thought it was really good. So this is one of my favorite things about 2021, aside from hearing the fact that there's more Sync coming out, is the idea of Ron V doing Swamp Thing. Like,
yeah, very exciting for me.
Anybody who doesn't know, like, this is going to be a big deal. This is going to be something people I think will talk about for in 20 years from now. The way we're talking about Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, people may, I think, be talking about Ron V's work because
and Ron V might have even better hair than Alan Moore. So
my goodness, he's got the best hair I've ever seen.
I'm not sure you've ever met Ram V in person, but like it shines. It's amazing.
It does. I feel bad. Like our very first interview with the creator, doing it like this was with Alex Packnadell, right? Yeah. And I felt like we were being funny, but maybe it was too much. We were like, "What is Ram V's secret? Is it like what's up with Ram V's hair? What does he do?" And Ram he's agreed to be on the show this year. So I mean, Brian, me and you can't avoid the question, like, what's your hair care ritual? Because that is glorious.
I think that's that. You know, we can talk about, all your graffitis wall and all that, yada, yada. What people really want to know is, what do you do with that hair? Like,
let's start off with a bang.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just clip that out and put it on together. Ron V on hair care. He's gonna send me an email tomorrow, be like, I can't do the show. Cerebros goes, is anybody else Googling images of Ron V right now? You should. He is quite the most handsome man, I think, in comics. No offense, John or Brian or anybody else out there, but Ron V is, I'm quite struck with Ron V, to be honest with you. Yeah, I follow him on IG. Yeah, you got to get them black and white, like those like nice, like artsy photos. Man, Really nice stuff.
Yeah.
I'm
Back
completely
back
sidetracked now.
in Nightfall, I just look like a scene from a Razorhead, so I don't even want to try it anymore.
That's what I do. Brian, what do you got, man? I'm all shook up now thinking about Ron V's hair, luscious locks.
Well, a question I usually ask is there any particular music types or anything you listen to while you're working, or do you normally?
I'm not the biggest music guy in general. Like, you know, like for, you know, like a lot of folk, like, you know, like, oh, what, you don't listen to music? I do listen to music, but mainly like I tend to like listen to like golden oldies and like film soundtracks and stuff. And especially if I'm like, you know, writing comics, you know, I usually like to try and come up with stuff that kind of feels like it's ambient, like, and kind of fits into the mood of that. Like I remember back when I was writing and then when I was gone, I listened to a lot of like the Shining soundtrack, and a lot of like that kind of like creepy stuff. And like the theme tune for Fargo was like something I played over like on loop pretty much, and I was like writing Mountainhead. Or just like the score for the Fargo TV series as well. And like, you know, so yeah, like I like to listen to a little bit of like sort of subtle stuff like that to get me in the mood. And it also helped that James Fairley, a friend of mine who's an incredibly talented musician, actually created like an original soundtrack for Sync, which we put in like with Volume 1. We had these little cards like with links to the soundtrack, and it's like 30 original tracks. And like, so even now, when I go back, when I'm writing new issues of Sync, I go back and listen to that soundtrack. It's all very kind of John Carpenter synthy, like, you know, unless it can, you know, so yeah, that kind of gets me in the mood.
Oh, cool. Can you still get that soundtrack? Or is that
I'm actually going to, well, I've been posting me snippets of it here and there on my Patreon page, but I'm actually going to maybe like get in touch with the publisher and see if there's a way of releasing it now, because enough time's passed, like, you know, I think the book's kind of like out of circulation enough that we may have a chance to kind of re-release it and get it out there. But I think what would really dig it, no pun intended, that I think it's like, you know, a really cool soundtrack. I think Jamie did a fantastic job on it, and I'd love to have more people hearing it.
Oh yeah, because that sounds awesome.
Yeah. Also, if I were to choose like one like classic perennial who I will regularly listen to for anything that I write, is Nick Cave. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds or Grinder Man. Like, he's a kind of like catch all that, like, no matter what I'm writing, I can find a Nick Cave song that'll get me in the mood for it.
Nice. I'm a big fan of movie soundtracks myself. I just love listening to them. What are some of your favorites?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mentioned like The Shining, like that's like, you know, obviously like a big one. I just like, I love a lot of like the soundtrack. Like I think Hans Zimmer does a lot of good stuff, especially like, you know, with his, like, you know, his Nolan movies and stuff. Like the Inception soundtrack, that's got some bangers. That's what the kids say, isn't it? Bangers.
I think I've heard that somewhere.
And like, you know, The Dark Knight. Obviously, The Dark Knight's my favorite movie in general. Like, and I love the soundtrack of that. Nice. Yeah, like in a lot of horror soundtrack, John Carpenter, like, is like, you know, like a lot of his themes from his movies, like his Halloween theme. Also, The Fog is a great one. You know, I think, you know, he's like a, you know, obviously great like standby to listen to. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah. Do you like Goblin at all? I think they do some of the best horror soundtracks.
Oh, why can't I have not mentioned Goblin? That's Goblin's like one of the big ones for me. Like, I love like the score for Suspiria and Deep Red, you know, or one of the project I've been working on recently, like something I've been listening to a lot, is the Tenebrae theme. And
what was that band Cross? They use that in one of their songs, and the Tenebrae soundtrack is amazing. I think that's a really underappreciated Argento flick, to be honest.
Yeah. So, although of course you can't beat Suspiria, like, you know, that witch, you know. But like, like I remember, like, for me, like I went to see when I was in England, when I was in Leeds for Thought Bubble, Goblin were performing live, and it was like they was in an old theatre, and they had this big giant screen, and they were playing Suspiria, and they were playing the soundtrack of Suspiria live, and they were playing it so loud you couldn't hear the dialogue of the movie. You could just watch the images and hear their music, and I feel it's the best way to experience that movie from watching like an opera, pretty much.
The movie is already so dreamlike; it doesn't really care so much about its narrative.
Right. Yeah. They did that at a theater a couple hours away from here. I was thinking about going, but I can't remember. I mean, it was I don't know, a 4 hour drive. But yeah, I heard they toured doing that. That sounded like an awesome way to watch it.
Yeah, they've been in this area, not recently, obviously, but they've been in this area a few times. I've always wanted to see Goblin. They're my favorite composers, and Argento's one of my favorite directors.
Yeah.
Not everything he does, obviously, but Suspiria is like my favorite horror.
Yeah,
movie.
like, you know, when he hits, he really hits, you know. I know, but like, but like, yeah, for me, one of the most purely cinematic images like of all time for me is like near the end of Suspiria, like when she's I don't want to get too much specific to spoil the plot, but she's found the secret door and she's walking through the hallway and it's like all the curtains and she's like looking ahead and she's crawling along the walls like this, and that theme is just coming in, like, you know, and it's the drums,
Yes.
almost ritualistic, you know, almost getting worked up into kind of like, you know, fugue state watching it. It's just powerful stuff.
Oh, it's amazing stuff. I love the bit when she's running through the forest, and this is a whole movie is amazing. And I've told everybody for Horror Fest 2021, we're wrapping it up on Halloween night with Suspiria. So we're finally
my annual Halloween party that I do. I always like to choose like a midnight mystery movie and show it, and like one of them was Suspiria, but it was a hit.
Nice. This leads me to the next thing I wanted to really talk about you with is horror. I grew up a big fan of horror movies. I've been watching them pretty much my whole life. I love horror comics, novels, all kinds of horror fiction. I get the vibe from you, John, that you like horror as well. What do you like about it so much, and what are some of your monumental pieces?
Well, I don't know what gave you the impression that I liked horror. Where did that crazy idea come from?
I don't know. I think I may have seen an interview or something. You're like, I don't know. I might like Monster Squad.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well that's all. Yeah, no, for me, like horror, like you, like all my life I've loved horror. Like Monster Squad was a massive movie for me as a kid. Like me and my cousin watched that movie on constant loop. Literally, my cousin would you know, who I lived just around the corner from, so he was pretty much like a brother to me, like, when I was growing up, you know. But we spent all our time together watching horror movies, and he would just constantly hire out Monster Squad and then return it after 3 days and immediately hire it out again and bring it home. So eventually the video shop just like sold him the copy of Monster Squad so he could keep it, you know. So like for me, like I was watching stuff I probably shouldn't have watched in the youngest days. Like we had an unscrupulous video shop on our street. So I was like 4 or 5 years old. I would just like walk like the 3-minute walk from my house down to the video shop and would pick up like Disney's Peter Pan and Maniac Cop 3. You know, and I'd come home, you know, for a double bill, you know, or like House, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, the Dream Warriors, you know.
Oh,
you know, and
we're the Dream Warriors.
Well, and there's talking about a great soundtrack. There's another one that had the greatest soundtrack.
Yes.
But like, yeah, no. So for me, like horror's always been a part of my like life, and for me, I kind of like, I have weird like you know, for horror, I have kind of like comfort and warm vibes from it, like, you know, rather than like, you know, thinking it's something scary or alien, because I've always loved it and I've always experienced it. For me, like in terms of like big touchstones of horror, I'd say one of the big early ones was seeing Scream. I remember I saw that when it first came out on video in the UK, would have been about 1996, so I would have been 10 years old. And I'd obviously like seen horror from a young age, you know, but that was like one of my first times of thinking like, I think seeing Scream and blown away by Scream and like being old enough at that point to appreciate the storytelling that was going on was enough to kind of like kickstart the next phase of like my horror fandom, where I then started seeking out all the classics and like, you know, trying to like, you know, watching movies like seeking out The Shining, seeking out Halloween, and seeking out like, you know, all these things. So, you know, like, you know, and that just happened to happen at a nice time in the UK, because the UK obviously had a lot of films banned. We had the whole Video Nasty scandal here in the UK, where a lot of movies were banned. So it was only like 1996, 97 that movies like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Exorcist were allowed to be shown in the UK. So I was getting to experience all these movies as they were just getting re-released into the world, you know, and they all had that kind of forbidden feeling about them because they've been banned for so long. So those are special movies. And Halloween's a massive film for me. I watch that every year on Halloween. I've done so since I had a VHS copy and a DVD copy and now a Blu-ray copy. But every year I watch that movie. So that's a massive, like, you know, touchstone for me. Like I mentioned, The Shining, that's a huge film for me. Just Stephen King in general. I can't remember. Like Stephen King's my favourite author. Like, the first Stephen King book I read was Salem's Law. I remember reading that on a summer camp when I was a counsellor as a teen. And I was terrified. And like The Stand is my all-time favorite book. I read that over like a summer holiday one year in Spain and was just transfixed by it. And yeah, like in terms of like other mediums, in terms of comics, Junji Ito's Uzumaki. Uzumaki, I remember I read that, maybe it would have been about 2010, 2011. And maybe 2010, it would have been earlier. And I read this and thought, oh, this is what comics are capable of. Comics can be this scary. And I think I've spent like the last decade like chasing the high that Junji Ito gave me. Thinking I'm going to try and do something that's half as scary as this, and not quite getting there, but like, trying my best. In terms of other great horror comics, Through the Woods by Emily Carroll is a great one. That's a masterpiece. So yeah, I love horror in all its forms. I'm trying to think of other great horror movies. The Thing, obviously, I mentioned that. I'm sure that's a classic. Jaws. I'm not sure if Jaws counts as a horror, but like it's my favorite movie or one of my favorite movies. So like that would be a big one as well. So yeah, like I love horror. Every year, not this year coming because it's thanks pandemic, but every year I go to the Glasgow Fright Fest in Glasgow, which is like a 2-day marathon of like a dozen horror movies. If you're lucky, you'll get like 3 good ones. But yeah, like so like any chance I have, obviously I'm subscribed to Shudder. Any chance I can have to discover new horror, or gorge myself in like horror, I'll take it.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, you've talked a lot about The Shining, and you're a big Stephen King fan. What do you like better, King's novel or Kubrick's film?
See, a lot of folk are expected to take a side. I actually love them both as very different things. And for me, like that, I think a lot of folk think you have to say this one's inherently better than that. They're doing different things. For me, like Stephen King's book, the novel, The Shining. I hope you don't mind me going off on these big tangents, but like,
please do. It's the whole point, John. That's why we asked you here.
But Stephen King's novel, The Shining, is a story about a good family, and like Stephen King thinks they're good because he sees a lot of himself in like Jack Torrance as a recovering alcoholic, So like he sees this as a good family who are being corrupted and destroyed by an actively evil, malevolent hotel that's trying to like tear them apart and trying to turn them wicked. Stanley Kubrick's movie, I think the hotel itself is certainly haunted, but I think it's more ambivalent. It's more like less actively evil than it's a mirror that reflects itself back at the people that come into it. So Stanley Kubrick's version, like the people like Jack Torrance comes into that hotel, like, with these demons, and like the hotel just merely brings them to life. And for me, like, they're very different. Like for me, like there's no better, like illustration of the differences than the endings, because the movie and the book are literally fire and ice, I think. One of them is cold and calculating and uncomfortable. The other one's like fiery and emotional and full of passion. And both approaches work, but they're just different approaches.
Yeah, I think that's really spot on, and I think that's great. I love how I think in Kubrick's Shining, I get this idea that it's like, because I don't know if you've ever seen. There's a documentary. It's called Room
57.
Yes, right. And there's like, so many ideas.
Ideas and 2/3 like cuckoo, But like,
I know, right? But I was like, there's a piece of me. I was like, I think it's all about it. And after watching that, I was like, I think this movie is about the haunted history of mankind.
Yeah.
Like no matter what situation we as a in a global community go into, we feel like we've been through a lot. We know what to do. We can handle this gig. But we bring our own ghosts, our own demons into the situation, and then it just. I think it is about the Native Americans. I think it's about the Holocaust. I think it's about all the terrible things that mankind has done throughout the history of the evolution of mankind. Basically, coming up, the whole idea of the sins of the father, right? Yeah. And I think that's what that is, and I love the idea of how that can relate to Jack Nicholson's character and Danny, right? And I that's a great film. Brian, do you like The Shining? By the way,
I do like The Shining.
As the sun has started setting, your room has gotten more pukey.
Yeah, that's going to happen. Sunset's kind of early here, and
for me here, I think your wallpaper has a lovely hue. I think it's very characterful.
Look how nice of a guy John is.
Thank you. It causes different reactions in different people, I think. So, I love The Shining. I think the movie. I haven't read the book. I have read a fair amount of Stephen King stuff. Back in the day, but I love that movie.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
it's funny because like the
you know, one of these days I might write like, you know, a hotel-based horror comic that was, you know, based in like, you know,
sounds like a good idea.
When I first read
Good
Hotel,
work.
I was like thinking, man, wouldn't it be cool? And I never saw that show Bates Motel, but I'm a big Psycho fan, but I've never seen Bates Motel. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if there was an anthology about the Bates Motel, different stories, different people that come in there, but Norman's kind of like the crypt keeper in a way. I don't know. I thought that would be cool. Brian, any questions you have on John and his love of horror?
I don't have anything new. It's funny because I'm not I don't have a long history with horror, but because of Robbie though, I have gotten more into it, and the way that this resurgence in Western world comics with horror is coming up. And you mentioned Junji Ito. I have read Uzumaki, and I thought part of that, what I thought was interesting is that I think that's been going on for a long time, the horror in Japanese comics, because you know, going back, I found a bunch more. But I guess have you read Junji Ito's book about the cats, the diary one?
Yeah. Junji Ito's Cat Diary. I've read little bits of it. I've actually owned like the copy of it. Like I bought it, but I've not read it yet. Because I want to be a Junji Ito completist. But I just think it's great that in Japan, like, you know, Junji Ito is most fondly known as, like, you know, a cat diary person, like, you know, whose sidelines in horror. You know, like,
yeah, yeah. It's definitely like what I don't know. I recommend it to anybody that's read any of this stuff, because I mean the horror stuff is great and it's very powerful, like you were saying. I mean, like you know, I was simultaneously, you know, freaked out, revulsed, and everything like that, but I couldn't put it down. You know, reading it, and then but then I read that cat diary, and I was you know, just laughing so hard. I don't know. It was, and there's tiny little horror elements in there too, which are really funny too. But yeah.
He can write something wholesome, like, you know, but then he just makes it a bit creepy just by virtue of being who he is and how he draws.
Right. Yeah. I think he goes through a whole lot of ink too. I don't know. That's.
I'm definitely looking forward to his new book, or not new book, but like the new translation of his old book, like Rumina. That's got an English language release, and I think it's just came out in the US, and we're expecting it next week or so here in the UK.
Okay. What was it called?
Rumina. Remina, Rumina.
Okay. Yeah. Let's check that one out.
I've heard great things about that work. About that's Ito, right?
Yeah.
I've heard great things about all of his stuff, and I haven't checked any of it out yet. Steven, the Shy Warrior, wants to know: have you seen Dr. Sleep? And I guess, what did you think about it, if you have, John?
Oh no, you've opened up a can of worms here. This is gonna be another long one. Actually, I really like Dr. Sleep. But the problem is, right, I read that book, and I thought it was a great book. I really enjoyed it, and I thought they're going to have a really hard time making a movie out of this, because if you've read the book Dr. Sleep, the book isn't really a horror story. It's a story about someone who experienced horror in their life at one point. It's all about like their road to recovery and finding happiness and purpose in their lives. And it's actually quite an uplifting, like, emotional story. And so like, even though it kind of draws from The Shining, it isn't really like a sequel to The Shining that much. It's like a new story in a different genre. And then I saw the movie came out, and I thought, oh, they're going to have so much pressure to make this the sequel to The Shining, you know. I think like it's not perfect, but I think like the director of that, I can't remember his name, but he did Haunting Hill House. But the director of Dr. Sleep did a largely like skillful balance of doing an adaptation of Dr. Sleep, the novel, and also doing a sequel to The Shining, the movie. It's a difficult act to pull off, and I don't think he did it quite perfectly, but he did that. He made a good attempt at it.
Cool. I haven't read the book nor seen the movie, but I keep hearing from people that I should do both.
Yeah.
So, especially being a fan of The Shining. I got a few more questions for you, homie.
Cool.
Do you like sports? What's your favorite sports?
Wrestling.
Really? Like entertainment wrestling, or like real wrestling?
Like pro wrestling. Like, that's like as much as I know. No, like, I don't really watch that much sport. I'll maybe watch like the Olympics and stuff and that stuff. I'm not a regular like real sports.
Yeah, like who is? You just made, by the way, Mike, who said that Sync was a big impact on his life. Mike is the hugest pro wrestling fan, so you just made him incredibly happy, I'm sure.
Oh, well,
what do you like about wrestling? Who are your favorites?
Oh, again, like I'm a massive, like lifelong, like wrestling fan. Like I watched that when I was like when I wasn't like hiring dodgy horror movies at the video shop. I was like watching. I was hiring like wrestling pay-per-views out at the video shop. Yes, like I've been watching since like 1992, to varying degrees of diligence. But in terms of like favorites, like Daniel Bryan is probably like my all-time favorite. And I've been a fan of his since like the old like indie days, like Ring of Honor days, like 2005, 2006. So seeing how far he comes, like a bit surreal. And yeah, like obviously a lot of the predictable ones like Mick Foley, stuff like that, like as terms of like all-time favorites right now. I'm a big fan of like the Japan stuff. Like Kazuchika Okada, I think is like an amazing wrestler. I think just in general, if you think you like wrestling and like you're feeling like unsatisfied by WWE, go check out New Japan World and some of the stuff going on there. It'll blow your minds, my friends.
Yeah, I hear a lot of good stuff about that. That's really cool. I'm a big fan of The Rock from back in the day. I watched in the 80s and the 90s when it was like, all about Hulk Hogan and Macho Man. Ultimate Warrior and The Rock, though, probably my favorites ever. And I love that Attitude Era, as problematic as it is today.
Yeah.
I freaking love it.
Like, I lived all through that. Actually, I thought that was the best ever. Like, it was amazing. And you start thinking, I wish things could be as good as they were in the Attitude Era. And you actually watch some of it back, like, no, I don't know.
You're like, oh, that's a little weird. Brian doesn't know anything about wrestling, nor does he care, I bet, right?
Well, I have been meaning to check out the Japanese stuff like you were talking about. Daniel Warren Johnson did his Inktober a year or two ago was wrestling stars from that.
So much, yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, so I picked that up. It just looks so good, but yeah, I don't know anything about it, but I want to check it out.
Japanese wrestling, like Robbie will hook us up and I'll give you a wee starter list of essential matches you should check out.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll hook you up.
Okay, that sounds good.
If you get, what's your Twitter handle, Brian? Is it like Chewy Brain or something? Is that Twitter too? I don't know.
Yeah, it's at Chewy Brain. Yeah.
Okay. If you get a friend request or a follow from Chewy Brain, that's Brian.
Right. Okay. I may have actually got one earlier today. I don't know. I need to go and see.
He's like, who cares? Who's this guy? Oh, he's from Alabama. Fuck him. I'm just kidding. Here's another question. We asked this of everybody. I am really big, and it's cool because the dad or the opening dad in Mountainhead, you mentioned him being a conspiracy theorist, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I think people like him give real conspiracy theorists a bad name because there are literally real things out there that should be more looked on by the populace, I think, like things that governments do and it's whatever. There's more that goes on behind the scenes than people realize. But I, like most conspiracy theorists would tell you, I'm not crazy. Do you believe in, first of all, do you believe in, not just do you believe aliens exist? Because obviously most people would say, well, sure, in this expansive. Do you think that aliens have visited Earth? Do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever had an experience along any of these lines, any unexplained phenomena, anything like that, John?
Well, I think the alien thing was obviously like, a big, like conspiracy thing, like for, maybe the government's hid aliens. I think that that whole idea of secret alien encounters, got ruined forever when Donald Trump became president, because as soon as he got access to those, he went on Twitter saying just saw the aliens in Area 51, sad, so the fact that he's not blabbed about it means there's probably not any.
Well, here's the thing is they wouldn't tell the Clintons about aliens or Jimmy Carter. Why would they tell Donald Trump? Because they know what he would have done.
I do think for me, in terms of especially ghosts and stuff, I don't know. For me, I'm not sure. I think that there's a lot of stuff that's kind of hard to explain that I've heard. I'm not sure if I've not really had any supernatural experiences myself, or anything like that. But I don't know. For me, I don't I would maybe say that I'm not someone that's so arrogant to think that we as people know everything there is to know about the world in reality. I think there is probably stuff beyond what we understand, how that manifests itself, I'm not sure, but yeah, I'll keep an open mind. I'm not going to be one of these people if I go to a house And like, you know, if I move into a new house one day and things start moving around and like I hear unexplained noises, I'm moving out. I'm not like one of these people going, well, ghosts don't exist. I'm staying here until like, you know, I find my guts strung up in like a raft or somewhere.
Like the house comes alive and
I don't believe ghosts exist. I'm away. I'm going.
All of a sudden the house comes alive, starts picking you apart, and you're like, Dan Waters was right. But
I don't think this is happening to me. It must be a hallucination of some kind.
Yeah, right. I've seen strange lights in the sky. I've actually had visions of Jesus. It's weird, some of the things that have happened in my life and other people I've talked to. But like what's weird is the one thing I don't believe in is ghosts. And it's like I like, oh, maybe aliens around, but I believe in extra dimensional entities and demons and who knows, like what? There's all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm a big fan of Grant Morrison. You probably know what I'm talking about. But like
I managed to hear Grant Morrison tell like the abducted by aliens in Kathmandu story.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's almost like a musician who like has like a favorite, you know, like has like a hit song where like he was doing like a panel in Scotland at some, I think it was at Edinburgh at some like, you know, book festival, and someone said, tell us your aliens in Kathmandu story. So it's like, you know, okay, I'll tell you the aliens in Kathmandu story. And the closest I've come to believing in aliens was in Grant Morrison, with not sounding crazy in the slightest, with his utter calm authority and casualness explained to me about how he got abducted by aliens in Kathmandu. I'm like, yeah, maybe that's something to that whole alien thing.
That story, he tells that story with such conviction, does he not? Like, and just like, I know you think I'm crazy, but who cares? Like, think I'm crazy if you want, but do what I'm telling you and see what happens. Grant's been in some dark corners. He's led me to some dark corners through his work. And I believe in all kinds of crazy stuff at times. Believe is the wrong word. I have more ideas, I guess, about it. Grant got me introduced into Robert Anton Wilson, who Brian is a big fan of. And don't worry, Brian, I'll read Illuminatus trilogy one day. But I don't believe in ghosts. That's the one thing I don't believe in. Like someone's like, oh, this place is haunted. I'm like, oh, that's BS. That's just some kind of interdimensional trickster entity playing with you. And they're like, what? That doesn't make sense. I love talking about aliens. Aliens are real, though.
TV show has ever captured an actual ghost. They things are all nonsense.
I know, right? Like, and I love that stuff. I love watching Ghost Adventures. I love watching those shows, but I think it's all BS. But here's the thing: as much as I think it's BS, if me and my homies, if me, Brian, and a few other members of the Excitable PCP crew got together with some like EMF equipment and some, you know, infrared cameras, and we went to a supposed haunted place with no lights for the entire night, we'd get some footage of us being creeped out too, I'm sure. And that's a beautiful thing, is the mystery of the world.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I'm one of these things where I won't take chances. Like, yes, like I as an intellectual man, I shall say, you know, yeah, I don't think like this house is really haunted, or I don't think like, you know, ghosts are a threat to us, yada yada. But there's no way I'm touching a Ouija board. You know, there's no way I'm like, I'm not going to take any chances. I'm not going to say like some ghost name in the mirror, but the lights turned out. You know,
right? Yeah, I don't believe in it, but I ain't going to test it.
Yeah.
No kidding.
I'm risk averse on that too.
Better safe than sorry. We always have we used to do always a PCP Halloween party every year. We haven't for the last year, obviously, but we always have a room where we have a Ouija board set up, and nobody ever goes in there. And I'm like, y'all, I'll show you the box. This is made by Hasbro. Like, it's okay. And nobody will ever go in that room. I'll put some damn dip in there and nobody will go in there. I'll put a keg in there and nobody will go in there. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. The Cerebros goes, comic books, Stephen King, aliens. Is this the best interview ever? It's always fun here on Pop Culture Philosophers. Absolutely.
I was going to ask on the ghost
Brian,
thing. Have you read Jerusalem by Alan Moore by any chance? Is it? Oh, well.
Is it frozen?
Yeah, have you? Oh, no. Yes. Have you? Because on the ghost thing, I don't know.
I think
there's a whole lot more. I'm sorry?
I think you were talking to Robbie. I didn't realize you were talking to me there.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to say that Jerusalem by Alan Moore has one of the better explanations of ghosts and things like that. That I'm not a big supernatural fan or whatever, but that one, like his treatment of things like that in that book is really, really super cool.
Yeah, I've not read Jerusalem. I think the length of it seemed a bit daunting to me to try.
Yeah.
Brian knows I own it, but I've never read it. It's like so huge. It's so big.
Well, it's always on hand for any intruders that may break in if you want to just like have a.
Yeah. Well, it took me 5 months to get through it, if that's any indication. So, but yeah, Ditcha Bidikar tweeted one time about how he got the Audible version and it won awards for best Audible of the year or whatever. And that actually made it easier to get through as doing it that way. But it's something like 40 plus hours still.
Is the Audible read by Alan Moore?
No.
Because I remember back in the early 2000s, I was going through the previews catalog one time and I saw these Alan Moore CDs. So like I ordered them and they were like this weird like instrumental, like Alan Moore reciting weird stuff, and it was the most fascinating thing I've ever listened to. Anyway, that's pretty cool. Brian, any final questions for John?
Oh, sorry, honey.
John, say what you were going to say.
Like, there should be more like examples of writers doing like performative reading. Like one of the best nights I had out was like I went to an evening with Neil Gaiman, like where he like was reading short stories and doing these songs and like
that sounds awesome.
It's fun and just like up on the stage, and it's just like not a lot of writers could get away with that, like because he has an interesting voice and like he has a personality. I think it's an interesting thing for writers to do. I'd like to see more of it. Have
you checked out the Audible for Sandman that he was the narrator of? Oh, it's so good, is it not?
No, I need to check it out.
Oh, it's so amazing. Me and Brian have both listened to it, I think, and it's Brian. You've listened to it, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Really James McAvoy is Morpheus, but Neil Gaiman does the narration. You're right. He's got that voice. Yep. He really, really does. Brian, what do you got to say finally to John before we wrap up here?
Well, yeah, I don't have any more questions. I guess just, thank you for, coming out and, really looking forward to, what you got coming next too.
Yeah. I've got more coming up in the year ahead. Stuff we've talked about, stuff I've not talked about. Watch this space. Yep. So there's plenty of stuff coming ahead. If you want to keep up with me, you can always follow me on Twitter at JohnLees927. You can subscribe to my newsletter at deepender.johnleescomics.com. That's deep-end.johnlees.comics.com. Or you can go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/John Lees. I post up on there. I think that's me covered everything. Oh, Instagram, John Lees 927. I think that's everything. Also, pick up Mountainhead in shops now.
Yes, pick up Mountainhead in shops now. And that basically, you've already done the plugs. But John, any final thoughts for the PCP Army here tonight? And your hotel just fell. Don't worry, it's fine.
That's fine.
It's not my actual comics. They're like pristine. They're set aside. I'm waiting for that television deal to hit for hotels. It would make a great television, and we'll all get rich off of that, John.
I'll just say thanks a lot. I've really enjoyed being on the show. I've enjoyed talking to you guys. I've loved the questions and from the PCP Army. I think that you're all really engaged and really enthusiastic, and it's really cool to see such a kind of positive, vibrant fan community. So yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Oh, thank you for being here. Kid and Puke wants to throw in one more time. Mountainhead, best comic of the year.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely fantastic. Y'all, if you love my recommendations and you follow along and you haven't read Mountainhead yet, you really, really need to. It is fantastic. It is unexpected. It is horror. It is drama. It's got a little bit of comedy. It's got amazing artwork. And if you haven't checked out his other work, especially Sink and Hotel, and when Emily was gone, right?
Emily was gone.
Yeah. So many more works from John Lees and a bright future in the industry from this gentleman. John, thank you for being with us. Station. We're out PCP Army. Next week, we're going to be joined by Tomorrow Cinema. And the week after that, we'll be joined by David Andre, the writer of Resonant, another fantastic writer who's doing some really cool stuff over at Vault Comics. By the way, John, have you pitched a Vault? If not, you really should. I think you'd fit in there.
Well, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, but I've definitely talked to some of the guys over there. They're a very nice bunch, and I would definitely like to work with them at some point in the future. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, Adrian, if you watch this, get John on. You know he's going to do something big. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We are out PCP Army Station. Y'all have a good one.